as we would start to do this body work, people would start to share stories about their, I mean, you name it, their divorces, their childhood traumas, their sexual history that may have involved some unwanted sexual advances or activity. They would get into kind of these really deep emotional patterns. And I can think back now and tell you that my knee wasn't just a physical problem, which is why the physical modalities weren't really taking it out. So this was a huge surprise to me because I thought, as somebody who worked with people's bodies, that I was going to be working with people's bodies. I didn't really anticipate that the emotional piece of it was going to be, I don't know what percentage, but it's a huge percentage of what is happening.
Okay, welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Julie Johnson. I am the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions. We are a mental health counseling agency here in Iowa. We're still doing telehealth sessions over the phone and over the computer. We are also doing outpatient counseling services in any of our 6 office locations.
And I'm Chrissa. I am the vice president at Heart and Solutions in charge of our BHIS department. So BHIS stands for Behavioral Health Intervention Services. And that's the program where we go in home and work with kids ages 4 through 18 on different behavioral skills. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
All right. So we post on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Central Time. So batch up that laundry or meal prepping or any other task you hate doing and do it once a week and put on the podcast for their new episode with our new guest every single week. And that gives you the entire week to get scheduled with a counselor, to call into a counselor, or to get scheduled with one of our guests that you hear about that week. So Sunday nights at 5 p.m. All right. So we have a guest this week that you might want to call this week. So let us introduce you to her. So we've got Janis Isaman here with us today. Hi, Janis. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
I am super happy to be here with you.
Awesome. So let me go ahead and brag on Janis a little bit. Okay. So you might have seen Janis or read about her in Reader's Digest. You may have read about her in Prevention Magazine, Women's Health, Cosmopolitan, Working Mother, Saprkpeople, MyFitnessPal. Oh, we love MyFitnessPal. And Beachbody. So you may already know of Janis from any of these publications, but Janis is a one-on-one private health consultant. She owns a Calgary-based My Body Couture. Okay, or no, I'm sorry. Say it for me.
Couture.
My Body Couture. Okay. So Janis is the owner of My Body Couture. We are really, really excited to hear about this. So is this online service that you're offering for people? And how would somebody get started if they're interested in this service?
Yeah. So like a lot of businesses, I now do hybrid. I actually was doing digital services pre-pandemic. And then my business was actually mandated to be shut. So that digital component really expanded out. And I love it actually, because I do still see people bricks and mortar, but I also now have a whole digital service package. I mainly work with people one-on-one. So when you do go to my website, sometimes people are looking for classes or group offerings, but it is one-on-one because what I do is a very special service for people.
So tell us about what makes your services stand out from other maybe health coaching. I know that you are a certified movement specialist and that you're also trained, you've got psychotherapy background. So tell us more about what makes your services different from other health coaches out there.
That's a great question. So it really links into why I'm on your show today. So I started working with people primarily on their body about 16 years ago. So I had some pain in my body and I couldn't figure out how to make it go away. So I basically started running and I hurt my knee. And like a lot of people, I went for help. I went for professional help. So I went to massage therapists and acupuncturists. I went to a rolfer. I went to sports therapist, and nothing actually helped. So I was really after the body modalities because the injury was in my body. So I thought that's what I should do. And eventually I actually discovered Pilates, and that became kind of my base modality because that modality actually healed my knee. It made me feel better. And on my life went. And I had a completely different career. I ended up training in Pilates. And then I added a modality called Yamuna body rolling. And what I noticed when I started working with clients, because I always worked with people one-on-one, was that as we would start to do this body work, people would start to share stories about their, you name it, their divorces, their childhood traumas, their sexual history that may have involved some unwanted sexual advances or activity. They would get into kind of these really deep emotional patterns. And I can think back now and tell you that my knee wasn't just a physical problem, which is why the physical modalities weren't really taking it out. So this was a huge surprise to me because I thought, as somebody who worked with people's bodies, that I was going to be working with people's bodies. I didn't really anticipate that the emotional piece of it was going to be, I don't know what percentage, but it's a huge percentage of what is happening. So I started doing a lot of reading and trying to absorb whatever I could about emotions. I did not grow up in a family that was pro-emotion. So this was all kind of new to me as well. And eventually, years and years later, I actually professionally trained with Dr. Gabor Mate. And so that is actually a specific kind of trauma work. And then I folded that into my work to have that really specific kind of counseling piece. So I'm really working with people's bodies. So people are coming in often with pain, most commonly with the kind of pain that the medical system, just like the story I just told you, scans are saying your body's fine, but they don't feel fine. So I'm mostly working with people, and it could be, I get people with fibromyalgia, with sciatica that are really struggling to walk and function. But I also get a lot of people that just are like, my back hurts and it's just kind of nagging and annoying and it's been there for a couple of years. And so there isn't some big medical crisis where they can't get off the couch. So when we're saying pain, a lot of people relate to this. Their neck hurts chronically for a couple of years, or their back hurts, or what have you. And most people have really tried to go through that traditional medical system, and nothing is really taking. Nothing is solving it. So I'm working with a whole set of modalities, as you kind of read on my bio. We're tackling what you're eating, we're tackling how you're moving, and I'm really doing that in an integrative way. And then we're also tackling those emotions and those underpinnings, those traumas that kind of led your body to be sensitive to that pain and to have those movement patterns in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, there's so many people who have lost some faith in the medical profession, the medical field, because they go from doctor to doctor to doctor and sometimes don't feel like they're being heard, or that their pain isn't being believed, because they'll do all these tests and go, you shouldn't have pain there, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
physically that we can see to kind of help you with. And so that's where somebody would seek out a partnership with you, where they could
Absolutely.
look at these alternative ways to not only cope with that pain, but to work through that pain so that it's resolved. So your knee, for example, have you find that your knee is something that that is resolved and healed, or is that something that you use the practice to continually work?
That's a good question. So my knee injury was a long time ago. It was a couple decades ago. And so I certainly have a body like everybody else that has creaks and aches and pains and loses weight and gains weight and has all the things. But essentially, the reason I do what I do is because I sought out a solution. and it has actually worked. And then I've added other tools, and I have taken a lot of different trainings, a lot of education, a lot of, hands-on client hours. And I've kind of distilled that down into what the tools and the techniques and the approaches and the education that really has spoken to me. And then we can replicate that with different people's bodies and different people's emotional landscapes and their different traumas, and kind of boil it down. So the answer is yes. However, it's like many things, it's not sort of like an instantaneous piece. I have to maintain that. I have to still work on it. And I'm not really working on the knee as much, but I'm just kind of working on that full body, mind body wellness and mind body health component.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if we don't heal, or if we're not actively working on healing those things, then the natural course of things is they disintegrate. The natural course of
Yes,
things,
absolutely.
right, is they get
Yeah.
worse. They don't naturally get better. And so what I love about what you're doing is that you've got an approach to meet people exactly where they are, because you
Yes.
have so many different approaches. So when you go into the psychological realm with your clients, do you wait until that client's body presents something to them through the physical work, or do you go directly there in collaboration with the physical work that you're doing? How do you approach those situations?
Oh, I love that question, because unlike when you're calling a therapist or a counselor, you know that you're going to be going into your mind, and you're going to be going into that work. When you come into my space, that could be the furthest thing from your mind. So as you said, number one, I do meet clients where they are, and every counselor and every therapist will actually tell you the same thing. We can't dig into people's traumas and dig into people's experiences if they don't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
So it is something that my clients know. There is a lot of conversational component, and sometimes to the client it can seem like we're just chit-chatting, even though I have training in how to actually extract meaning from that, because there's a huge part of counseling also that is seeing people, attuning to people, witnessing, validating, mirroring. And so sometimes on some of those clients that are actually maybe a little bit more resistant, maybe that's the only thing that's happening, is I'm just hearing and witnessing and attuning to their experience. Other clients really want to dig into this work. And so what I tend to do is when they walk into the room, because I do have 16 years of training, education, and experience in reading a body, I can kind of almost tell, partly also because I work with these people fairly regularly, I can kind of tell where they're at. So there is just ways that people's bodies hold tension. So sometimes we actually wait for some of the conversational component and let their body just release a little bit of the tension, because a lot of us have stress that we're just carrying around that's like super in the moment. And if we're on the verge of tears because of something that just happened this morning, maybe we can't really go back and sort of start to somatically heal childhood wounds. Maybe we need to just address what's here and now. And then other times people will come in just ready to do that deeper work, because again, we're doing that deep trauma work where the body is actually holding the information, and it could be 30, 40 years old in some cases. So with that, we want to have the right tone for how we present the work. So some of the sessions are just movement based, and that's kind of all we do. And we have chit chat. Other sessions we're combining the work. Other sessions I work with people just verbally. So it really does depend on where someone's at. And that's one of the things I love about it, because even when we sign up for counseling, maybe there are other things that are kind of just blocking the way. So I have tools to just help people's bodies actually relax. And if we get there, we get there. If we don't get there, that's okay. We can do it next time.
Absolutely. It's so interesting how symptomology presents itself, in so many different ways. And, in counseling, in mental health counseling, like you said, when people come in, they're expecting to do maybe some talking, and they're expecting to have that be primarily cognitive.
Yes.
And with your approach, people are kind of coming in a little bit backdoor, right? Because
they are, yeah, absolutely.
Going like, hey,
absolutely.
I've got pain, I've got physical pain. Yep. This is showing up physically in my body. So now what do I do with that? Because there is kind of a feeling of disconnect, I think, in our society between what is cognitive, what is emotional, what
absolutely.
is physical. And so the idea that one translates into the other can be kind of difficult for people to experience and to kind of wrap our minds around. So the idea that somebody can come in and say, no, this is presenting itself physically through physical pain, because sometimes for a lot of us, that was the only way we could safely experience our emotions, was through physical expression, right? Either physical expression or those symptoms coming through physically as pain, or as impulse, right?
Absolutely.
Movement.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's been a lot of work done in the last, I don't know, I would say 3 decades. Peter Levine has somatic experiencing, which integrates the two. Gabor Mate has compassionate inquiry. And so I think that this will be something that if we had this podcast 20, 30 years from now, it would be everybody just sort of accepts it, knows it, they understand it. It's something that's just part of society. But I completely agree. I think that it does take people by surprise. But yeah, when I talk about it with clients, it makes complete sense. So if we are tense, we know what that feels like in our body. You can feel your shoulders tightening up. Maybe you can feel a little bit of tension in your upper back. A lot of people will get sort of butterflies or inflammation in their stomach. We actually have terminology and words and sort of slang phrases for this in our society. We talk about a pain in our ass. We talk about, the butterflies in our stomach. So we know that somatics and emotions are linked. But often, because we did have a long period of time, where science split the mind and the body, we weren't acculturated. So many people, millennials, Gen X, boomers, we weren't raised to think that they were one thing, but they are one thing. There is no such thing as having stress and tension without having a physical response in your body. People can read that on your face. You can read it on your energy. You'll do things like grit your teeth, clench your jaw. You'll have that tightness in different pieces of your body. So it's impossible. And, vice versa with joy. You can tell when somebody's happy. It's simple things. It's a smile, but there's a whole energy, and every part of your body changes, angry versus happy. So as those emotions wash through us, we think nothing of it. But we know when we stop to think about it that that's true. So when we really have people that have childhood traumas, developmental traumas, those were part of how we patterned our body and our movement as we grew up. So for a lot of people, that's part of where some of that pain comes from, is that we have patterned that way for decades in many cases. And so the MRI scan is showing, well, there's nothing wrong with your hip, ma'am, or nothing wrong with your knee, sir. But that pain channel has developed because that's biologically, the pain channel actually doesn't really care if it's physical pain or emotional pain. So again, people kind of think, how is that the case? But we all know if somebody that we love dies, we feel something that is very close to physical pain. You can feel that strongly, generally through the chest. There's an aching, there's a hole, there's a space there, and it feels physically painful. So if we develop that way, we are going to have physical manifestations of this 10 years later, 20 years later. I would say, for example, I definitely don't share this with clients necessarily, in terms of I'm not diagnosing them, but there is a way that sexual assault shows up in a woman's body. So if we don't actually move that trauma through at the time of the assault, that has quite a strong pattern in terms of movement sometime later in your body. And it actually tends to mirror itself from woman to woman. So it won't matter really how old the woman is. There's just something that happens in a woman's body that it changes the biology of how we're moving through the abdomen, the torso, the pelvis, things like that. So, I mean, again, I'm not saying to a woman after watching her do some exercises in the torso, like, have you been sexually assaulted? But quite often that'll come out, and that's how I noticed that was patterned similarly. So much as each of us are different, and the way that we move and express ourselves are different, there's actually some common similarities when we have had sort of traumatic events in our life that will show up patterned very similar from person to person. And that actually makes sense because across the board, we have our 6 core emotions: anger, fear. They appear on people's faces the same way through centuries, through different cultures, through people who've never been exposed to each other. So our basic human biology is giving certain information that's being given just through our body. So that's the piece that I'm really working with. And like I said, I think this is kind of on the forefront of a conversation that in 20, 30, 40 years will just be how all counseling and all mental and physical health is actually structured. But at the moment, it is a bit newer. So it does take a bit more client education. And therefore, the process from person to person can be a little bit different because some people just are not expecting that.
I love what you said about, well, first of all, when you called it information instead of pain, that was like, I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so first of all, I gotta highlight that. Like, wow, that's amazing. I've never heard somebody say that before, and that did it for me. So yeah, absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense what you're saying too about how there are physical reactions that we have to things that we don't even notice. We're not even
absolutely,
like our blood vessels dilate. We don't know that that's happening.
Heart rate will speed up.
Yes.
The breath pattern will change. And we don't have control over a bunch of these things. I can decide right now to smile, but I can't decide if my heart rate's going up or down, or, I could actually control my breath, but there's a lot of it that's just automatically happening without my knowledge, consent. I don't have to think about it.
Absolutely. When we think about things like laugh lines, right? It's similar in some way because our body adapts to the things that we are doing on a regular basis. And
absolutely.
So laugh lines or, I've seen research on, when we've had a traumatic life experience where our life was threatened, that the tendency is that our shoulders will hunch over our chest cavity because that's where all our important stuff is.
Absolutely.
Is our heart and our lungs, right? We got to protect our spine.
Yeah.
So there's a tendency physically then to, as a reaction to that trauma, when we're triggered by those things, by external things that remind us of that trauma, to hunch over and protect, right, our vitals, protect all of our important stuff in our chest cavity.
Absolutely.
And that we can see that even in posture, right? And then that affects breathing, because when our body kind of shapes that way from just doing it over and over, then that affects our lung capacity, and then that affects our blood, right? And
that's
all
right.
of those things.
Yeah.
All of that makes so much sense.
Yeah,
that's right.
And so what you're talking about in terms of sexual abuse or sexual trauma, that if there are other physical manifestations there where, if we've had a life-threatening incident and we have a tendency to do that, right, and to close up our chest to protect our chest, that we might have that similar tendency just as human beings.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And then I think just to dovetail onto that, if we are going to a counselor and we are doing kind of all of this work to change how we think, and we're changing our thought patterns, and we're getting really healthy in our brain, but our body is still curled up, crunched up, and tense, and we can't take in that breath, it's going to be harder to kind of reconcile what's happening in the brain and the body. So we can actually unfold some of what's happening in the body by doing that counseling work, but they're really powerful together, because I know not everybody can see right now, but if you kind of raise your shoulders up to your ears and tense in between your back, you can feel how this is a familiar sensation. We've all kind of done that when you're sort of you're tense, maybe you're at deadline. So if you're sitting at the counselor like that and you're going through all of this kind of calming work, and yet your shoulders are still just tensed up there, which a lot of people's actually are, it's really hard to actually change your brain and say, hey, brain, we're totally safe here when your shoulders are up into your ears and you're tensed in between your shoulders. You can't really take that breath into your chest. So some of a lot of those body patterns that I'm actually working with, they're not new. They're things that, some of it really is from sitting at a desk and that repetitive strain syndrome, but a lot of it is just from, I don't know. I mean, you name it, and it's from somebody's divorce 15 years ago. It's from somebody's, childhood trauma. It's from just the way that they pattern their body to get through their life. And so, when we're doing all of this mental health work, if the body isn't on board, it's going to be a lot harder to actually remain calm and to come into that parasympathetic state when our body is actually ready to pounce.
It's amazing how, we talk about our brain trying to protect us, and sometimes does way too good of a job, right? And
it does.
Our body does the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
our body tries to protect us with all of those like tension and right, and the rapid breathing. That's all in preparation to fight or run, right?
Absolutely,
our body's trying its best. It's just not. It doesn't know where it is, and that's not the way, the kind of safety that we're actually looking for.
That's right. I mean, our world is so complex now. It used to be very simple in terms of, I mean, we died earlier and we would have to spend a lot of our time just gathering food, but there weren't kind of constant dings coming in from our phone, and there weren't constant strangers around, and we weren't engaging on social media, and we didn't have all these work deadlines. And so even just on a day-to-day basis, a lot of us are in that fight and flight mode a lot more than we even realize. So one of the things that I do is I actually really help give people that deeper education on what a relaxed body actually feels like. So sometimes that can take a while to get there, but we really go through techniques and tools that people can repeat and do on their own at home. And then we actually have presence about it. So I will actually engage in dialogue, and they will lay on the floor and they'll feel their body in that position or feel the change or the shift. And that helps us recognize when we're not in that state, because the average person, I mean, this is the number one thing my clients tell me, like, no one has ever pointed this out to me, because our body just feels how it feels. And for most of us, we spend close to zero time thinking about how our body feels. We often are looking at our body and thinking negative thoughts about our body, but we're almost never thinking, oh, is my shoulder open or is it tight right now? Yeah. So I have tools and exercises to take people through so that it happens quite quickly, but that we can really develop that internal knowledge and that present body awareness of whether we are actually in that state, because we're not even going to be able to do great. I talked about that early on, but we kind of can't move into some of that trauma therapy if somebody is coming in and their shoulders are up in the ear and they're tense and they're not breathing and because something just happened. I just had think about trying to do trauma therapy if you just had a car accident. You're not going to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's the state that a lot of people are kind of just walking around in. So I really help people get that unfolded so that we can start to do some of that work, or that they can do it with another counselor.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's we feel like our life is the only normal life, right?
Yeah,
and so
it's true.
if we have chronic and constant pain, you start to block it out. We start to not notice it. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like that's just the norm. And then some days it's worse than that, and some days it's better than that, but we still have pain, but we feel like, oh, this is a good day, because that baseline just gets so far removed from the absence of pain. And I keep coming back to the fact that you called it information. I just think that is like amazing, just amazing, because our body is trying to is trying to tell us these things. And we recently heard this quote on the show that if we don't listen when our body whispers, we will have to listen when it yells, right?
That's a fact.
And it's so true, but we don't spend time listening to our body. And what you're doing is you're kind of being a translator. You're helping somebody to go, okay, your body is giving you this information. How do you put that up here, right? How do you utilize that information that your body's giving you?
Yeah. And I mean, just on a movement only level, our culture has told people that what we need to do is go to the gym. And a lot of my clients end up in a position where they're like, actually, that's not what I need to do. Because if we're walking around super tense and then we go run 5 miles, for a lot of people, the rest of our life just doesn't support that. So then we come home and are making dinner for the kids, and we're doing homework, and we're catching up on work projects, and we're checking the phone. And what we actually need to be doing in that window that maybe we're going for a run in, and some people do need to run, but maybe we need to come and do some restorative yoga, or maybe we need to do something that's go for a walk and just do something that's actually going to balance the body out. So I think a lot of us actually really do. I love the word translator, because that's actually what I'm trying to do. I'm not telling a client what to do. I'm helping facilitate their own internal knowledge so that they can walk away with that knowledge and sustain their body. And some days that is going to mean doing something a little bit more intense. Other days that maybe means just doing nothing, or like I said, maybe doing some yin yoga, or doing some ball rolling, or doing something that's just more restorative to the body.
Gosh, it's like couples counseling for in one person. It's like couples counseling between your body and your mind. Right?
It's actually super true.
Let them communicate with each other, and let them both be heard, and let them both get their needs met.
It's true. And there is a constant negotiation. So
yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness, I love that. It, like you said, it is it, once people hear it, it makes total sense, right? We intuitively, we know these things. We do know them. It's been trained out of us.
That's pretty
and
much
it's been educated out of us. And so we, but when we hear it, it makes total sense. And our brain cannot accept new information or true information or changes in those thought patterns if our body is screaming, no, it's not. No, you're not safe.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we have to have the body show up and be part of the process. And so the counseling work that I'm doing is very somatic. Where do you feel that, somebody might share something that's uncomfortable or that they're triggered by? Where do you feel that in the body? Where's that showing up in the body? And when we can, it always has a sensation. It's usually in the trunk. That could be the back, that could be the front, it could be the stomach. I have had, though, people tell me that it's in their toes or their feet. But where is that information showing up in the body? And that's kind of where we start. And then we attach emotions to it, then we attach belief systems to it. But all of these things show up somewhere in the body. The next time you do a counseling session, ask your client where it is in the body. And I guarantee they will have sensations somewhere. And part of what that also does is it pulls us into the present moment. So we can kind of get lost in the story of the person who just pissed us off and this thing that just happened and how someone else wronged us. But the second that we have to go into our own body for information, we are in the present moment. We are connected to the only thing that is true and real, which is our body. So everything about our experience, top to bottom, happens through our senses, happens through our taste and our sight and our sound, and it happens through all these sensations. So when we really pull those emotions into the body, we're now in our body. We're no longer in the head and he did this and she did that and then this happened and then this person wronged me and oh my God, and how can I change what I think about it? When we come into the body, we almost can't think about anything else because we have to most people have to sort of search for where it is and then develop that nuanced vocabulary. I feel burning at my chest. I feel it on the left side. So just kind of holding people in that helps them really. it's almost like something that we needed to get as children that we didn't really get. Because if you ask a child, they can always tell you, "Oh, it feels like a burning ball in my belly." And so it's actually walking adults through that process, and then they can connect those sensations to emotions, and then they can actually kind of start to change how they're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes we start with the thought and then we go into the emotion, then we go into the behavior. But I think that chain, it discounts the body. And so the feeling, the physical feeling, kind of is the start of some of those
Absolutely.
pieces. Yeah.
And I think that is actually a bit of a missing piece in some of the conversation, because I do talk to people about that. But if this is not going to happen because I live in the middle of a city, but if I was to go outside and a bear started running after me, it wouldn't start with a thought. My body would just go. I would basically not actually even have time to think. And then afterwards, then I would be like, oh my God, I was so scared. And then all of everything would kind of come from there. But we have head down. So we have thoughts that turn into emotions, that turn into behaviors, but we also have body that turns into emotion, that turns into thought. And it's pretty nuanced most of the time to kind of figure out what led the charge. But our body is almost always involved. But we should actually kind of have at least a basic awareness that sometimes the body is completely leading the charge. And again, we all kind of know that. Like, think back to a lot of people have this experience, so I'll just share this. But think back to sort of a really bad relational decision that you made, where you were like, I know this is a bad person, I know this is a bad partner for me, but you do it anyways because your body actually just compels you somehow forward to make out with that person, or to or to mate with that person. So our body actually can make more of those kind of decisions than we often even give it credit for.
Absolutely. It's backwards from a lot of the left to right thinking that we kind of do, right? We kind of think about things the way that we read them, right? Top to bottom, left to right. And so we do a lot of that thinking about, well, I felt the pain. I put my hand on the stove and then I felt the pain, and then I thought I should take that off,
exactly.
right? And then I do it. But really, it's like my hand is off before my brain even knows that I'm experiencing heat.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think my specialty is really working with developmental traumas. And when we have those, we end up with tons of coping mechanisms as adults that were just to help us survive, whether it was emotional neglect or sexual assault, or, a whole range of different developmental challenges. But what you just described becomes the way that we function and behave. And it's very difficult quite often to change it through just traditional counseling, because the nervous system is just over responsive. And that's part of what leads to pain or discomfort, or whatever word you want to use. But we have an over responsive system, and it's not anybody's fault. That's what helped, childhood survivors of any trauma to actually survive, because if there wasn't that over response, we wouldn't be alive. So when it comes to that, and my lensing through what is a childhood trauma, it isn't necessarily an event. It's a lack of being able to process it. And so you didn't maybe have an adult to talk you through and to get it out of your body. So, there's a lot of Generation X people out there, Gen X and boomers, that didn't have emotional parenting. That just wasn't part of what was happening. So, lots of timeouts and lots of spankings and lots of things like that. And that's part of childhood trauma. And so a lot of these folks end up in my space when they're 35, 45, 55, 65 years old. And the whole body is just a fire with different coping strategies, because really at the end of the day, this was a kid that was, every time they did something bad, they were sent to their room, and they're tense and they're tight and many have done loads of different types of physical work and just kind of can't make it make sense. And so it's really reconciling the brain and the body. Like you said, it's that marital counseling to sort of say, hey, let's get this worked out of your body, because your body is, it feels like it's on that hot stove, and it's just acting, and it's your brain is just making decisions before you even have time to kind of catch up to that.
Absolutely. Really, really interesting. Do you, and this is just me being curious thing, but which is the majority of the questions on the podcast. But do you find that when the trauma has occurred before the person had language, before the person was able to verbally express themselves, do you find that there's a difference?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So that is something that becomes intrinsic, and that means that basically we can't remember what it was. So that's part of why working with trauma is actually so hard, but it's also so interesting, because if something happened when you were, let's say you were sexually assaulted when you were 25, you probably remember that, and you can probably pin that as a moment that changed your life. You may or may not have gone to therapy. You may or may not have reported it. You may or may not have taken an action. But that's really different than a baby that was left to cry it out in their crib, because there's nothing as an adult that we can say, oh, it's from that. And quite often the whole system develops around that. And so that adult literally cannot tell the difference of life before and life after, because they didn't have verbal languaging skills. There's a change in a child's brain somewhere around age 6. So, and it's certainly pre-age 4. Anything that was kind of before the language skills and memory skills kick in, do tend to be much more intrinsically woven into the body. But things that will actually happen, the joints will actually pull in much tighter together. And that sounds like a funny thing to say, but again, think about what you do when you're seeking comfort. All of us, if we even think about sitting in front of a fireplace, we're going to roll our joints inwards and forwards. We're going to come into something that's like a little ball. Mm-hmm. So we tend to actually, we're not aware of it because it's just how our body's always been, but we tend to see people with much tighter joint spaces. There is actually a chemical reaction that happens in our body when we're under stress. So our fascia, our connective tissue, will pull tighter. Again, it makes sense, because what typically happens when we need to flee is we spring away. So that tightness and that tension that I just described is something that helps us propel forward. It gives us strength, it gives us power, it gives us movement, it gives us speed. So our body literally will physically develop around the fact that we have this kind of traumatic environment, and literally the way the bones, muscles, tissues, fascia, everything actually develops, but same thing in the brain. And so it is much harder to sort out, especially because a lot of people really do struggle. You know, if your parents under the age of 4 were just sort of, let's call it like vaguely emotionally neglectful, that can be a really hard thing to sort of admit out loud, because a lot of people say, well, my childhood was happy, nothing happened. And so there's kind of a couple different elements to it, but it absolutely 100% shows up in terms of how we move, how we function. Have you ever met an adult who just sort of had a cascade of different physical ailments? There's a high chance, and again, this is not diagnostic, but there's a high chance that if you kind of went into that person's deeper history, that you would probably find out that they had like childhood trauma that linked back to those pre-verbal years. Because that's, at the end of the day, if we're not verbal or we're mini verbal, we don't have a lot of tools that come out of our mouth to be able to actually do anything about it. So it's all our body.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
This is excellent. So if you could give one suggestion to somebody on the fence about starting counseling of any kind, what suggestion might you give them?
What would my suggestion be? I mean, I was gonna say just do it. Um, just be aware. I think I've spoken at length today that there's different kinds of counseling, and so maybe there is a fear of starting with somebody who's gonna do only talk work, but there is a whole submodality that is more somatic, and this could be a good entry point. But obviously this is not new information, but there's different counselors, there's different styles. But I think just kind of shop around, because if you're feeling a lot of emotional trepidation about starting, or you feel like it's a failure, maybe someone like myself is actually a better avenue where it's like a little trampoline. We work with your body, and then and then maybe if you want to explore some of that, we do. And obviously I work with other therapists and counselors to refer out, because I can't actually do everything. But I would just say, look around, because we're living in a world right now where there's just an explosion of work in the mental health world. And so maybe that thought pattern about what counseling, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, looks like, is not the beginning, middle, and end of what is actually available.
Wonderful. All right. So Janis, how can people reach you if they are interested in working with you one-on-one?
So you can just go to my website, which is mybodycouture.com, and that's MyBodyCouture.com. I'm also on every social media under the same name. So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And so you can just reach out through any of those platforms. Just send me a direct message. What I tend to do, I want to make sure that I'm a good match for all of my customers. So unlike a lot of other services, you can't just kind of roll in and book something online. So you do actually have to contact me, and we'll get a consultation set up. That's complimentary. We just kind of chat through everything on the phone. We make sure that there's a good fit. And part of that is because I have a certain skill set, and I really want to make sure with everybody that both our personalities and kind of the problem and potential solutions are a good match.
Wonderful. Yep. And that is something that it sounds like does set you apart as well,
Yes.
because you're kind of a niche
Yes.
to kind of subset, right? I mean, so it's not going to always necessarily be for everybody. And I think one thing that's really come across through our whole discussion is how educating your clients, how important that is to you, that clients know what they're getting from the start, that
Yes.
they know that, okay, this is something that we can work on. This might be something that maybe I refer you somewhere else first, or in conjunction with the work that we're going to do. And so that knowledge, giving that understanding and education to your clients or any potential clients, that's come through multiple times in this discussion about how important
Awesome.
that is to you. So I can tell,
Yeah.
that you really do care about that.
Yeah, that's a core piece of my work, because if it's not a good fit, I don't want to I don't want to waste somebody else's time or monetary investment, because we have so many professionals on the planet now in this area that you would be better served with somebody else. So that is a key piece of both my personal integrity and my professional success, is that the people who are coming in are really people that are a good fit for my business. I'm Janis Isaman, and I need a counselor.
So do we, by the way. So do I. So does Chrissa. And I talk a lot on this podcast about, the therapy that I do, but it's all talk therapy, the therapy that I do. And I think it would be very, very interesting for the podcast, especially if I tried something like this, to compare the experiences. Because I love that it's not one or the other. It is both are so important, and both are going to really work together in a very complementary way. So I think that would be a very cool thing to experience and be able to share on the podcast as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. If you are in Iowa and looking for outpatient mental health counseling or behavioral health counseling in home for your kiddos, give us a call at 800-531-4236 for Heart and Solutions.
And like Julie mentioned at the beginning, we post new episodes every Sunday night at 5 p.m. Central. So save up your laundry or meal prepping or whatever task you hate doing that week. Do it Sunday night while you listen to us, and we can help convince you to call a counselor or to call Janis and get set up with services with her that week as well. So if you have any questions for us or for Janis, you can reach out to us as well on You Need a Counselor Podcast on Facebook or DM us on Instagram at You Need a Counselor Podcast there as well. So I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Bye.